Alone. I admit, for a moment there, I considered giving up. I could feel the seconds ticking away, panic building up.
Like many Americans in recent years, I've been troubled by our industrial giants crumbling, good jobs shipped overseas, a worrying future for our children. Once we were unchallenged. Now we feel the heat of global competition daily. We know the pain, but don't know the cures. For 2 years, I've been on a journey looking for answers. Why are our best companies in trouble? What are some winning strategies for our future?
From the moment of inspiration to the harvest of dreams, wherever you want to be, we'll take you there. Proud leaders in New Mexico's education, KNME TV, APS, and UNM.
In the not-so-distant past, trains being pulled by steam locomotives could still be seen in every American city and town. Out of their smoky roundhouses, the amazing steam-driven contraptions crisscrossed the continent at alarming speeds and with incredible ease. As much as any other immigrant to the United States, this ingenious British invention found a welcome home in America, growing up with the expanding young nation. Railroads formed the backbone of the nation's transportation system, covering thousands of miles and reaching into even the most obscure and remote locations. The steam locomotive almost single-handedly conquered the plains and tamed the Wild West. It was here, in the vast, untamed American West, that the steam locomotive had its greatest effect, reaching high into the mountains of Colorado and Utah and across the arid flatlands of Nevada, New Mexico, and Wyoming. As the steam locomotive worked to shrink the vast distances of the American West, it grew to become a thundering monster, a fire-breathing behemoth, with enormous power whose lonesome cry could be heard day and night across the western states. But just when the steam locomotive seemed to have truly grown up, it suddenly vanished, leaving behind only a few rusted iron carcasses and the abandoned facilities which had been built to care for these brutes. Diesel locomotives, airplanes, and automobiles had all teamed up to kill the once magnificent beasts. Some of the luckier machines were spared from the scrapper's torch and put on display in parks and museums, and a very precious few can still be seen operating under their own power and even pulling trains over beautiful scenic railroads. 80 miles north of Salt Lake City, at a place known as Promontory Summit, is the Golden Spike National Historic Site. It was here on May 10, 1869, that a golden spike was driven into a laurel tie, completing the nation's first transcontinental railroad. The site, which is part of the National Park System, operates replicas of the two engines, which were on hand for the driving of the Golden Spike. The Union Pacific engine, known only by the number 119, and the Central Pacific engine, known as the Jupiter. The Transcontinental Railroad was built by two opposing railroad companies, the Union Pacific, who built west from Omaha, Nebraska, and the Central Pacific, who built east, starting at Sacramento, California. Both railroads were to continue to lay track until they met somewhere in the middle. The railroads were being paid for each mile of track that they laid by the government, so there was plenty of reason for each company to want to lay track faster than the other railroad. Soon an outright race developed, with each railroad hiring tens of thousands of workers in an effort to gobble up more and more land. The Central Pacific even brought in thousands of Chinese laborers by ship to San Francisco to help them win this bizarre race. Over 1,000 men were killed building the Transcontinental Railroad, but it was built in just a fraction of the time that anyone thought it would take. Records were set for laying track that remain unequaled even to this day. The point at which the two railroads met and the race ended was a desolate mountain pass north of the Great Salt Lake in Utah, known only as Promontory Summit. A great celebration was planned for May 10th, with many cities listening to the great event live as it happened by telegraph. Prayers were given and speeches made, and finally the last spike was driven, which had been wired to the telegraph so that the blows could be heard coast to coast. The famous Western photographer A.J. Russell was on hand to capture the great event on one of his fragile glass plates. The image that he recorded that day has become one of the most famous photographs in American history. Curator Denny Davis explains something of the site and their annual Railroaders Festival.
The National Park Service 10 years ago decided that the history of American railroading is kind of disappearing, and we decided here at Golden Spike National Historic Site that we'd like to keep that alive. And so we started 10 years ago our Railroaders Festival, so this is the 10th time that we've done that, and it's simply a celebration of American roading and the impact of railroading on American history. And we've got all kinds of activities. We've got musicians out here, we've got craftsmen. One of the things that I think spectators like the most, probably the spike driving contest. And the man that's won that the last 5 years in a row is coming back to defend his title, and we call it the World Championship Spike Driving Contest. The locomotives here at Golden Spike are 8 years old. This is their 8th summer of operation, and these are exact replicas, and they were made according to drawings that were researched. And in fact, there's more time was spent in the research and the development of the plans than actually went into the construction. And they were paid for by all of us as taxpayers, and they really do flesh out our program here. We try to capture people's attention, and it's easily done with the brightly colored brass and all of the accoutrements of the locomotives. But from that, we try and then go backward in time and help people realize the significance and why this area is a unit of the National Park System. What changed in the country as a result of the completion of the nation's first transcontinental railroad?
Miles west of Denver in Golden, Colorado, is the Colorado Railroad Museum. The museum is home to some unusual pieces of 3-foot narrow gauge railroad equipment that were quite common in the Old West. Many of the western railroads were built on narrow 3-foot gauge track because the small locomotives and trains could climb steeper hills and negotiate sharper curves. This strange rail truck is known as a galloping goose and ran on Colorado's famous Rio Grande Southern. The RGS operated a whole fleet of these rail buses during the Depression and hauled everything from passengers to mail with the odd contraptions. The pride of the Colorado Railroad Museum is the Rio Grande engine number 346. This little C-19 class locomotive was originally known as Cumbers and numbered 406 when it was built in 1881 by the Baldwin Locomotive Works in Philadelphia. Number 346 has been restored by the museum staff and volunteers. The Colorado Railroad Museum has been open for over 30 years and has one of the best collections of narrow gauge as well as full-size standard gauge pieces of equipment to be found anywhere. Just minutes up Clear Creek Canyon from the Colorado Railroad Museum is the town of Central City. Clear Creek Canyon was once the path of a 3-foot gauge branch of the Colorado and Southern. The branch was originally part of the Mountain Division of the Colorado Central, one of the oldest narrow gauge lines in the West. A small part of the old line into Central City has been relaid, and Colorado and Southern engine number 71 has been restored to operating condition and is being run on this scenic road. Number 71 was on open display in Central City for years after it was retired in 1941, and yet the engine has been restored to near perfect condition. Number 71 was built by Baldwin in 1896 at a cost of $7,445. Colorado and Southern was known for its odd-looking, very tall spark arresters, known as Ridgeway spark arresters, and for the strange practice of mounting their air tanks on top of their boilers. Number 71 is currently the only Colorado and Southern engine that is in running condition. It runs daily out of Central City all summer long. Number 71 was only one of the many narrow-gauge engines that climbed the steep grades of Clear Creek Canyon. The Colorado Central tracks ran up Clear Creek Canyon all the way to Georgetown, a small but prosperous mining community where the canyon was too narrow and steep to go any farther. In order to get around the steep hill, the railroad built a loop of track with a high bridge to carry trains over the lower track. The loop became known as the Georgetown Loop, and the high bridge was known as the Devil's Gate Viaduct. The ride over the loop was one of the favorite tourist attractions of the Denver area around the turn of the century. Thousands of people rode the trains over the loop and took in the fabulous scenery of the Rocky Mountains every year. Only a short distance up Clear Creek Canyon from the Central City turnoff, trains are once more winding their way up the Georgetown Loop, even though the entire loop was taken up and scrapped in 1939. Through the efforts of Barbara Sutler and the Colorado Historical Society, with the help of the Naval Reserve's Construction Battalion and Lindsay Ashby, a small section of track was relaid in 1974. Almost every year since then, they have laid a little more track and restored several 3-foot gauge engines. In 1984, they were able to realize a major goal when, with the aid of the Batchelor Foundation, they rebuilt the Devil's Gate Viaduct. Over 100 years after the line was built by the Colorado Central, the Georgetown Loop was once more become one of the most popular tourist attractions in the Denver area. The fabulous scenery of the Colorado Rockies can still best be seen from a steam-powered narrow-gauge train. The king of the Western narrow-gauge railroads was always the fabulous Denver and Rio Grande. The tracks of the huge narrow-gauge empire reached out from its hometown of Denver for hundreds of miles, south into New Mexico, and west all the way to Salt Lake City and Ogden. One of the most popular lines on the Rio Grande was a branch known as the San Juan Extension. Starting in Alamosa, the line ran south to Antonito, then west along the New Mexico border through Chama to Durango, and finally turning north to Silverton in the heart of the San Juan Mountains. Even after the rest of the Rio Grande was reconstructed to standard gauge and saw the passing of the steam engine, this branch remained as a narrow-gauge steam-powered line until 1968. Two parts of the San Juan Extension are still operating as scenic lines, the line from Durango to Silverton and the line from Antonito to Chama, known today as the Cumbres and Toltec Scenic Railroad. With over 64 miles of track, the Cumbres and Toltec is the longest scenic narrow-gauge line in the United States. The town of Chama looks much the same today as it did 50 years ago. The water tank and coaling tower are still standing, and part of the original roundhouse is still being used. One of the favorite sections of this line has always been Cumbres Pass, the roughly 10-mile climb up out of Chama. Grades in the canyon are very steep, as much as 4% in much of the canyon, and larger trains often require 2 engines in order to climb the steep hills. As the trains near the summit, they pass the rocky crags of Windy Point, well known to thousands of passengers who have traveled this line over the past 100 years for its magnificent panorama of the canyon below. One of the favorite features on the Cumbres and Toltec is their special charter trains, which are often freight trains. This very impressive double-headed mixed freight was chartered in 1986 for the annual narrow gauge convention, which was being held in Denver that year. The Cumbres and Toltec is one of the few scenic railroads that keeps a fleet of freight cars in working order and even does restoration work on them, just for use on these special freight charters. The price of a ticket for one of these charters can be quite high, as much as $400 for a 2-day trip. But anyone who has ever taken one will tell you it's well worth the money. The Cumbres and Toltec is the favorite of many rail fans because it looks and feels so much like the original Rio Grande. Sights like this heavy freight being pulled up steep grades were common in the golden days of the Western narrow gauge. The Cumbres and Toltec is also well known for the fantastic canyon known as Toltec Gorge. The tracks in the canyon are cut into a narrow ledge hundreds of feet above the canyon floor. Like the rest of the Cumbres and Toltec, the scenery is as rugged as it is beautiful. The other part of the San Juan extension that is still in operation is the beautiful line from Durango to Silverton, being run as the Durango and Silverton Scenic Railroad. The large engines being used on the Durango and Silverton, as well as the ones on the Cumbres and Toltec, were all originally Rio Grande Mikados. These were some of the largest engines used on a narrow-gauge railroad, the largest of which are about the same size as a small standard-gauge road engine. Large engines like these were needed in order to pull the long trains found on the Rio Grande up the steep grades of the Rocky Mountains. These engines share the unusual feature of having only large counterweights mounted on the ends of their drive axles. This is because their drive wheels are actually mounted between their wide frame rails. In Durango, the 5 working engines of the DNS are still serviced out of a roundhouse with a turntable, which was common practice in the days of steam. All summer, 4 trains leave Durango every morning for the 44-mile trip to Silverton and then return that afternoon. The Durango and Silverton is probably the most popular scenic line with tourists, and all 4 trains sell out for almost every trip. Passengers are well advised to get reservations early. The equipment and track on the Durango and Silverton is among the best maintained anywhere. Many of the bright yellow cars were built in the shops in Durango, but most of them are original Rio Grande passenger cars, which have been beautifully restored. The 5 locomotives on the Durango and Silverton are as well restored and maintained as the rest of the equipment. There are no diesel locomotives on the railroad, and all operations, including track maintenance, must be done with the fleet of steam locomotives. The railroad also has 4 more steam engines which are not operational that they hope to have running in the near future. the small mountain town of Rockwood, the historic steam trains enter the fabulous Animas Canyon, well known for its high granite cliffs and thundering river. The canyon is accessible only by train. You will not find a better way to see the towering San Juan Mountains than from one of the bright yellow cars of the Durango and Silverton. "30 miles south of Reno, Nevada, in the arid foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountains, stands the wild western town of Virginia City. Virginia City sits directly atop the famous Comstock Lode, a huge deposit of silver and gold that once attracted people to these hills like a magnet. The opulence of the town's past glory can still be seen in its fabulous homes. Virginia City was as bizarre and wild a town as could be found in the Old West. Its saloons and gambling houses are legend. Fortunes were won and lost in these buildings faster than the wealth could be dug out of the ground. Lives were lost as well. The fast-paced and dangerous lifestyle of the silver miners kept the undertakers busy and the cemeteries full. The men in these graves saw a weird chapter in the history of the West, like the time the town's 2 volunteer fire departments fought a gun battle over the right to put out a small fire in Patrick Lynch's saloon. As the battle raged, the fire consumed a major part of the business district. Or the time Mark Twain was run out of town for challenging a fellow writer to a duel. It was the mines that made it all possible. They paid to rebuild the business district every time it burned down. They paid for a nice opera and a nice sewer and 2 really nice churches. The mines could buy anything, even a coal stove trimmed with pounds of silver and gold, or a newspaper empire for a man named William Randolph Hearst. The mines also bought a railroad, the romantic Virginia and Truckee, a standard gauge link between the mines and mills around Virginia City and the Transcontinental Railroad on the Truckee River in the north. Within a few short months of the driving of the Golden Spike in Utah, trains were moving from Virginia City to Carson City, and the tracks were being pushed north toward the Truckee River. Only the best equipment and rolling stock were purchased for the Virginia and Truckee. Its coaches were every bit as splendid as the Victorian homes of Virginia City. 16 locomotives were ordered from American, Baldwin, Cook, and Booth, which were the best money could buy. Nothing second-rate was going to be bought with Comstock money. In spite of the overwhelming cost to build the Virginia and Truckee, the railroad was extremely profitable, making over $100,000 per month. Even though the Virginia and Truckee was truthfully known as the richest short line in the world, eventually the mines played out and the rails were taken up. In 1938, the tracks between Virginia City and Carson City were removed, and in 1950 the railroad ceased to exist. However, the romantic little short line wasn't going to give up that easily. In 1976, some of the track from Virginia City to Gold Hill was relaid, and today a Virginia and Truckee train can still be seen steaming up the old grade. Visitors to Virginia City can ride the little train for several miles down the canyon, and plans call for rebuilding one of the high wood trestles that the Virginia and Truckee were so famous for, and laying track as far as Gold Hill. Engine 29 is a good example of the type of engine that ran on these tracks in the later years of the legendary railroad. 29 was built by Baldwin in 1916 and originally ran on the Longview, Portland, and Northern. Many locomotives of the Virginia and Truckee have survived and gone on to careers in the movies and can be seen in museums in California and Nevada. Virginia and Truckee engines have starred in such films as Cecil B. DeMille's spectacular Union Pacific and the hit TV show Wild Wild West. One good place to see a great collection of Virginia and Truckee engines is the Nevada State Railroad Museum, about 12 miles south of Virginia City in Carson City. The Nevada State Railroad Museum has one of the best collections of 19th century locomotives to be found in the West. Number 8 was built by Cook in 1888 and is classified as an American type of engine because of the wheel arrangement of 4 lead wheels, 4 drive wheels, and no trailing wheels. These were the most common type of locomotives in America in the middle part of the 19th century. The Nevada State Railroad Museum is located in Carson City across from the Silver City Mall, only a few miles from the old roundhouse of the Virginia and Truckee. This was the hub of operations for the busy little railroad. The Nevada State Railroad Museum is home to 4 restored steam engines, several of which operate on holiday weekends. Virginia and Truckee engine number 25 was built by Baldwin in 1905 and is classified as a 460 or 10-wheeler, again because of its wheel arrangement. Also on display inside of the museum are Virginia and Truckee engine number 22, also called the Inyo, and 18, also known as the Dayton. The museum is also restoring a 3-foot narrow-gauge engine called the Glenbrook, which was built in 1875 by Baldwin. 300 miles east of the Nevada State Railroad Museum, in the center of the Great Basin, the overgrown tracks of the Nevada Northern can be found winding their way up a broad and desolate valley. The Nevada Northern was built in 1906 by Mark Requa to connect the mining district of Ely to the Transcontinental Railroad 150 miles to the north. Much of the railroad looks the same today as it did over 80 years ago when it was built, even though the line was shut down in 1978. This was a hard-working and frugal little line where nothing was replaced unless it was beyond repair. The man who managed the line for years, Pete Peterson, believed in never throwing anything away. And even the receipts for the first load of ties to start construction in 1905 can still be found in the files in the East Ely Station. The East Ely Station was the control center for the Nevada Northern, and the whole operation was run from these offices. In 1941, Pete Peterson was told by the parent company of the Nevada Northern, Kennecott Copper, to scrap out 4 passenger locomotives and all of the passenger cars, as the railroad had cut off all passenger service. However, not being a person who believed in throwing perfectly good trains away, Mr. Peterson took one of the locomotives and 2 of the cars and hid them in a large maintenance building instead. The locomotive that was hidden was a beautiful Baldwin 10-wheeler known as Number 40. Number 40 was stored in the shed for 46 years. In the company's paperwork, Mr. Peterson made the 10-wheeler disappear. When company officials from Salt Lake would come and inspect the operation, Pete would have Number 40 taken up to the mines and hidden. The engine was used in the late 50s and early 60s for several special excursion runs. But when the engine started getting too much attention, a story was started that the boiler had been destroyed and the engine would never move again. The engine was promptly put back in its shed, and it did not move again until 1986, when Kennecott Copper saw fit to give it to the people of Ely. The engine and the 2 cars have been making regular runs up Robinson Canyon every summer since then. Despite the fact that the engine has had no restoration work done on it and it's in completely original condition, the engine runs like it's brand new. The engine and cars are still wearing their original paint jobs that Mr. Peterson put on them before they were stored. It's no surprise that Number 40 has become a big hit with visitors to Ely, Nevada. The 8-mile line up Robinson Canyon once connected the yards and mills near Ely with the mines around Ruth and Copper Flat. Much of the ore from these mines was loaded from Lane City, named for a man named Lane, who claimed that spirits had told him that there was great wealth to be found in Robinson Canyon. As it turned out, the spirits were right, but not for Mr. Lane, because he spent everything he had looking for gold only a few miles from one of the richest copper deposits in North America. Over $1 billion worth of ore has been removed from the mines in Robinson Canyon, and small amounts of ore are still being mined today. Because of the steep grades and narrow canyon, the 8-mile line up Robinson Canyon took just as long to build as the 140-mile line north from Ely to Cobre, where the Nevada Northern interchanged with the Transcontinental Railroad. Number 40 operates between East Ely and Keystone Junction. The train does not continue on to the actual mines because they are very dangerous. The huge open pits are filling with water and the sides are caving in. Keystone Junction is also near the town of New Ruth, much of which is the same as Old Ruth, only in a new place. When the huge Ruth pit expanded too close to the town of Ruth, Kennecott moved the whole town down the canyon a few miles to get it out of the way. The baggage car on the train number 20 is actually a baggage express combine. The front part of the car holds a small post office which is walled off from the rest of the car in order to make it harder to rob. The car was built in 1907 by the St. Louis Car Company and originally ran on the Grand Trunk Railroad. The chair car, number 5, was originally a deluxe Pullman car built in the 1890s by the Pullman Car Company, known as the Cilicia. The car was bought by the Nevada Northern in 1910 and converted to a chair car in 1917. Around Keystone Junction can be seen the gigantic overburden dumps. These mountains of rock had to be removed in order to even get to the ore. The railroad also operates a diesel excursion between East Ely and McGill, which runs every weekend. Number 40 operates only on special weekends and holidays. From out of Cheyenne, Wyoming, comes the great marauders of the West. Union Pacific Engine 8444 and its big brother 3985. These huge steam engines make special runs across the Union Pacific tracks and can turn up almost any place in the West. Much of the Union Pacific still follows the same route laid out for the original Transcontinental Railroad, built over 120 years ago. These monsters are some of the largest and fastest steam engines still operating today. 8444 is capable of speeds of over 100 miles per hour, even pulling a long passenger train. Giant engines like these were some of the last steam engines ever built. They were constructed in the early 1940s, at about the same time that the diesel engines started taking away the jobs of the steam locomotives. Just east of Salt Lake City and Ogden, not far from it, Utah's Wasatch Mountains rise thousands of feet above the state's largest cities. The magnificent peaks were conquered by many major railroads and short lines. The Union Pacific pushed the original Transcontinental Railroad down Echo and Weaver Canyons, and the Rio Grande pushed its narrow tracks over Soldier Summit and down American Fork Canyon. Today, the old Rio Grande standard gauge branch up Provo Canyon to the town of Heber is still operating as the Heber Creeper. Former Union Pacific Engine 618 as well as former Southern Pacific engine 1744, takes sightseers 16 miles up the canyon to the terminal in Heber. To the joy of rail fans, the Heber Creeper has opted to keep the engines in their original paint schemes. The appearance of the two engines is very similar to the way they looked when they were in service on the Union Pacific and the Southern Pacific. 1744 is a 260 built in 1901 by Baldwin for the Southern Pacific. 618 was built later in 1907 and has a 280 wheel arrangement. Small road engines like the ones on the Heber Creeper were a common sight in America in the later years of steam power. Unlike the huge road engines such as 8444, these hard-working locomotives had the lowly job of way freight service, connecting outlying rural areas to the major cities along the main line. The way freights, or peddlers as they were also known, performed the unromantic but very necessary task of pulling short freight trains at slow speeds while picking up and setting out cars along the way. The Heber Creeper operates on the old Provo Canyon branch of the Rio Grande. These tracks were laid up the canyon in 1898 and 99. Because of the steep grades and winding track, trains have always had to wind their way up the canyon at very slow speeds. Early passengers on the line who noted the rather slow progress unofficially dubbed the line and the trains which ran on it as the Heber Creeper. Union Pacific number 618 was given to the state of Utah by the Union Pacific in 1955 and put on display in the state fairgrounds. After 15 years on open display, in 1970, the engine was taken up Provo Canyon to Heber to start a new life as the principal locomotive on the Heber Creeper. Over the years, many engines have come and gone on the line, but number 618 has always been king on this beautiful scenic railroad. Above Provo Canyon, the Heber Creeper clings to the western bank of Deer Creek Reservoir and then crosses the broad alpine Heber Valley. The railroad operates year-round and is one of the few places that steam engines can be seen throwing towering clouds of white steam into a cold and snowy winter sky. The passing years have seen the almost total disappearance of the steam locomotive. Of the thousands that once crisscrossed America, only about 150 are still operating. However, because of the hard work of the people who love these giant iron contraptions, every year 1 or 2 more are being given a second life on a beautiful scenic railroad. Visitors to these railroads are not likely to forget experiencing firsthand the thrill of feeling the ground move as a locomotive steams slowly past, or the unforgettable smell of steam and coal smoke. In an age of faster-than-sound travel, these machines allow us to glimpse life in another time and actually experience what railroading was like in the twilight years of the Old West. More than just a way to move things from one place to another, these were the grand machines of American transportation, the tamers of the Wild West. Their distant cry beckoning travelers to far-off lands late at night. They are the tangible artifacts of a simpler time and more romantic way of getting from where you are to where you long to be.
Tune in next week when I'll Fly Away returns to its regular time, Sunday at 8. But now, when a passenger is found dead on a midday flight, a sleepy Poirot opens the investigation next on Mystery.